Welcome to the Times of Israel's daily briefing. Today is Sunday, September 7th, day 702, or 23 months of the war. Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our legal and settlements reporter, Jeremy Sharon. Hi, Jeremy. Thanks for joining me today.
Good to be with you, Amanda.
Always. Jeremy will give us a preview of a piece he's working on about a new Israel-based report that attempts to refute allegations of genocide in Gaza. Greta Thunberg has again set sail for Gaza on another so-called peace flotilla. We'll learn about the legalities of Israel turning them back. We'll hear an update on the government's efforts to oust the Attorney General and finish off with a new star-studded opening of a kindergarten in the illegal West Bank settlement of Homish. All of this and more when we're back. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our legal and settlements reporter, Jeremy Sharon. First, some updates. The United States has conveyed to the Hamas terror group a new set of principles for a comprehensive deal to end the war in Gaza, according to a Khan public broadcaster report this morning. In the meantime, the IDF has begun striking high-rise buildings in Gaza City ahead of a major operation there, which the IDF assesses could take up to a year. The takeover plan has raised fears for the hostages still in Gaza, and the families of two captives seen in a Hamas propaganda video that was released on Friday believe that their sons and potentially other hostages have been moved into Gaza City in recent days. In the Khan report, it said that the proposal was conveyed to the Hamas terror group via Gershon Baskin, who was a key Israeli negotiator in the deal that led to the release of IDF soldier Gilad Shalit from Hamas captivity in 2011. Jeremy, let's turn to you. And a new study conducted by a team of multidisciplinary researchers delves into accusations that Israel committed crimes against humanity, such as planned starvation, deliberate massacres, and even genocide during the war in Gaza. This study was led by Professor Dani Orbach, who is a military historian from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, in collaboration with Dr. Jonathan Boxman, who is an expert in quantitative research. What's interesting is the author's objective was to conduct a rigorous factual analysis of the methodologies and evidence behind the other genocide claims. So how did they go about checking into these claims of genocide?
Okay, so the report it's actually massive. It's 300 pages long, and it deals with several aspects of the genocide allegations. One of the principal aspects it deals with is the claims of starvation made against Israel as a policy towards Gaza civilians. And actually, that chapter, I think, takes up about 100 of the 300 pages. So that's really one of the main focuses. And it also talks about other aspects, including allegations of deliberately targeting civilians and bombings and massacres, frontal massacres of Gaza civilians. But as I said, the focus is on the issue of starvation. And one of the major points which Orbach and his colleagues bring up is that they say that a lot of the allegations are based on false data, erroneous information, especially the basis for which the needs of Gazan civilians every day was determined. So according to Orbach and his colleagues, they said that the UN and other aid agencies made a false assumption that before the war, 500 trucks of aid went into Gaza every day, 150 of which had food. But if you work out the actual calculation, which needs to be based on the number of working days that the crossings operate in which trucks are delivered, it was only 292 trucks going to Gaza, and only 73 of which had food items. That's like half of what the UN was assuming. So this actually these erroneous statistics were quoted by a lot of UN and humanitarian agencies during the course of the war, especially the beginning of the war, and also by the IPC organization, which has produced famine reports and repeatedly predicted that there will be famine, or that there is famine in Gaza. So this is one of the key data points which the report pulls up. Another issue is that the UN, including UNRWA, also underestimated or undercounted the actual amount of aid which Israel was putting into Gaza. And according to Orbach's study, on average, you needed about 82 trucks of food to go into Gaza every day. And generally, Israel has either met that requirement or exceeded it, meaning that there is, in theory, enough foodstuffs going into Gaza. Now, what Orbach said, I spoke to Orbach, I interviewed him after the final study was published last week. And what he wanted to focus on was that in order to make a genocide allegation, you really have to have a solid foundation of facts. And if you're not building on a solid foundation of facts, then your allegations or your assumptions, your conclusions are inevitably going to be flawed. And in particular, he wanted to point out that if you want to declare a genocide, okay, and crimes against humanity as well, as you know, the ICC, the International Criminal Court, has alleged against Prime Minister Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, you need to show that the perpetrator tried specifically to maximize civilian casualties, right? Or at the very least was utterly and completely indifferent. Okay, but if you see, this is what Orbach told me, that the perpetrator sacrifices military advantage, okay, in meaning giving warnings to civilians, supplying large amounts of aid, what Orbach describes as unprecedented amounts of humanitarian aid to the enemy territory, then all talk of genocide and crimes against humanity must be discarded, because that bar of showing that the perpetrator was trying to maximize civilian casualties, really cannot be met. Now, Orbach and the others in the study, they said that it's likely that war crimes have been committed during this war, and that war crimes happen in many wars, and they also were specifically critical of Israel's decision to block all aid from March to May this year, 2025. There was the ceasefire. During the ceasefire from January to March, massive amounts of aid were let into Gaza, and I think it was something like 600 trucks a day. And this was designed to alleviate the humanitarian situation in Gaza, to improve the situation. But what happened was Israel saw that it actually, there was large amounts of diversion by Hamas, and it increased Hamas's ability to continue ruling the Strip and continue governing the civilian population. Now, the idea behind stopping the aid was to impact and negatively influence Hamas's ability to govern. Now, Orbach is critical of that decision to cut off the aid, because he said that actually Israel didn't foresee, as it perhaps should have done, several factors. In that, firstly, consumption went up during that period. Okay, that ceasefire was actually meant to eventually lead to negotiations to a full cessation of the war, and that never happened. So the assumption inside Gaza amongst the civilian population may well have been, we don't have to store food, we don't have to save food, we can just increase massively our consumption. I think also the aspect of the level to which Hamas diverted aid was not taken into account, and also the spoliation of food, as food has often, especially fresh food, has a shelf life, and those factors weren't taken into account. So that by the end of May, and even actually before May, in April, the warehouses of the humanitarian organizations were running out, and a real humanitarian crisis did begin to take place. And there was severe suffering, even beyond what happened up till then. So, they're critical of Israel in that respect, but they also point out that so much aid went into Gaza between January and March that the Israeli assumption was that amount of aid actually should suffice for about 6 months until August.
Right, which again speaks to the idea of intention, no genocidal intent. Now, Jeremy, obviously this report was conducted by Israeli researchers of all sorts of different disciplines. And do they actually expect that the international stage will take them at their word, because they are biased, they are Israelis, and the world is basically against Israelis at this point? So are they doing this as some kind of exercise, or do they actually believe that people will latch onto these numbers and believe their own research?
Listen, these are serious academics. Orbach is from the Hebrew University. The others also have very good academic credentials. And as Orbach was saying to me, you look at their analysis, you look at the information that they've processed and analyzed, and they're saying that these are hard figures which you can determine and see for yourself. Not only that, they also point out on several occasions where, for instance, UNRWA, which is the humanitarian agency, the highly problematic humanitarian agency for the Palestinians, specifically the Palestinian refugees, they actually corrected their own data, for instance, on regarding and not only UNRWA but other agencies as well, on that problematic figure of 500 trucks a day going in before the war started, and also on they've corrected their data on the number of trucks which Israel has brought in to the Gaza Strip. So they're saying, and they're saying that if you look at the data, you can see a refutation of some of these genocide allegations, and absolutely they want to be taken seriously, and this is why they published this study, because they want to put out into the dialogue on this what they are saying are the actual real data, and on what this conversation should be based. In fact, Orbach said to me himself, he said, if you want to look at the real data and say, I still believe that Israel's committing genocide or war crimes or what have you, he said, that's fine, but at least have, I disagree with you vehemently, but at least have the real data, at least have the actual facts, and you can then assess whether Israel had genocidal intention. And as Orbach and his colleagues, argue, that's not the case.
Right. The numbers speak for themselves, but somehow I wish it were French or British academics who are doing the speaking about the numbers. Let's go to a short break. And we're back. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our legal and settlements reporter, Jeremy Sharon. So the peace activist Greta Thunberg has again set sail for Gaza. And according to what we understand, she should reach close to Israel's shores or Gaza shores in about a week. We understand she's near Tunisia right now. And the question arises, after all of these different attempts by all these different peace flotillas, or at least so-called peace flotillas, of course, live streamed to Twitter, etc., the whole way through. What is Israel's legal obligation? Meaning, when Israel does capture these flotillas inevitably and takes the people to Israel's shores, is this a legal action on the part of the Jewish state?
Yeah. So as we know, this is not the first flotilla of activists to try and break Israel's blockade on Gaza. It's not going to be the last, and this thing has gone on for many years, ever since Israel imposed a blockade on Gaza. I spoke to Dr. Eran Shami-Borel. He's a senior official at the Israel Democracy Institute, and he also served in the International Law Department of the IDF's Military Advocate General. And he pointed out that imposing a blockade is a very common practice by militaries around the world. It's legal. It has to be done within certain parameters and certain restrictions, but it's a very legal tool of war. Now, to enforce a blockade, that means that you have to declare that you've imposed a blockade, and you also have to declare to anyone that breaching the blockade will result in certain consequences, including interception, if that's the case. Shami Borel pointed me to the San Remo Manual on International Law applicable to armed conflicts at sea from 1994, and that says clearly merchant vessels believed on reasonable grounds to be breaching a blockade may be captured. Okay, and they may even be attacked if they are warned and then resist capture. Under the international law, such vessels may even be confiscated, and in fact, Israel has confiscated such vessels. I believe it's the Haifa District Court which is empowered to deal with questions of confiscating vessels trying to breach a blockade. And those decisions have even been upheld by Israel's High Court of Justice. So, I mean, in short, Israel has the legal right to impose a blockade, and under the international law, it is entitled to enforce that blockade. And that means even, by the way, in international waters. Okay, you don't. Shami Borel told me that you don't need to wait for a vessel to try and actually breach the blockade. If Greta Thunberg says, I intend to breach this blockade, which has been lawfully imposed, then Israel is entitled to intercept that vessel, whether it's in international waters or not. That's legal, and you don't have to wait, until they've actually breached the blockade.
Okay, that's so super fascinating. And obviously, all steps on this blockade and the flotilla will be live streamed, as I mentioned. So let's turn to the attempted ouster of the Attorney General, Gali Baharav Miara. And last week, there was a bit of an update when the High Court of Justice decided unanimously to recommend to the government that it cancel its decision to fire her. And the court told the government to inform it by September 14th whether it accepted the court's recommendation. So, Jeremy, the clock is ticking. What has happened so far, if anything?
Well, listen, the government decided not to respond to the petitions which had been filed against its decision to fire the Attorney General. And it decided also not to even to send a representative to court. Essentially, the government was basically boycotting the court, which is kind of unprecedented and a very concerning step in terms of what might happen down the road, whether the government will listen to the Supreme Court, whether or not we'll see a constitutional crisis. So is the government going to respond to the court's latest decision by September 14th, which is, next Sunday? I'm not sure. Often these things develop on the last day, so we might only know by then. But it was a very important decision, and it was, previous to this decision, there was one judge overseeing the case, the initial proceedings of the case. His name is Noam Solberg. He's an ardent, strident conservative. And he already recommended to the government, he said, the government basically changed the way it wanted to fire the Attorney General after having already embarked on an initial process. And, the court just does not abide, this type of tactic where you paint the target and then you fire the arrow, as the court has said. And so Noam Solberg at the time said, I really recommend that you go back to the original process. That would be the best idea. And that was kind of like a recommendation, not with the force of a court order, of a court decision. And this time around, we had fully nine judges on the court, 5 of whom are conservative to one degree or another, including Solberg. And they all said unanimously, we recommend you go back to the original path of trying to fire the Attorney General. This, what you've done is, essentially what they're saying is what you've done is just like a legal nonsense. This is not how, a normal democratic state which abides by the rule of law functions. And that's why it was, 9-0. It was such a categorical decision. And, we'll see what happens. If the government decides not to respond by September 14th, then the court will eventually just issue a ruling without the government's input at all, whether or not it sends any kind of update or argumentation. But that will only come, the court put a date of, I think, the end of October for all final submissions to be made if the government does not accept its recommendation by September 14th. And after that, who knows, we'll see what the court decides. Obviously, very likely they will decide that the dismissal of Baharav Miara was not legitimate based on its most recent ruling. And after that, we'll see whether the government decides to go, all in on a constitutional crisis with the court.
Now, Jeremy, we have those 2 dates, September 14th and Achrei Chagim, but most Israeli parents, you and I included, were counting down to September 1st when schools opened throughout Israel. And in the illegal settlement outpost of Chomesh, a new kindergarten was opened with the support and praise by Education Minister Yoav Kish and Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich. What's interesting, of course, about Chomesh is that 20 years ago, it was evacuated under the 2005 disengagement plan, and it is indeed an illegal settlement outpost. Tell us a little bit more about this new kindy in Chomesh.
Yes, may I also just join you in celebrating that September 1st date. Is really something of great importance for all parents around Israel. And also, as you said, for the new kindergarten in Chomesh. As you said, this actually a kindergarten which has been supported by the Ministry of Education and the Religious Education Network within the ministry. And we saw, several, a handful of kids, 10, 15 kids, celebrating in this new kindergarten, in this illegal outpost, with the head of the Samaria District Council, which is the settlement council in the region, and the Finance Minister, Bezalel Smotrich, sent a message. The Education Minister, Yoav Kish, sent a message. And they were all celebrating how this was a step towards building Israel's future in the entirety of the land of Israel. And Smotrich also made comments about Israel's right to all of the land of Israel, and including the whole of the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, as he refers to it. And I think, I was just looking at this and I was thinking that this is really reflective of, I think, the power right now of the settlement movement and the way it has really advanced its agenda in an unprecedented manner since it took office at the end of 2022. The government undid the law which prohibited Israelis from being in this area of the northern West Bank. Then the government brought about an IDF decision allowing Israelis to go back and live in Homesh and also one of the other settlements which was evacuated in 2005. And now we see that as I said, the education ministry, a legal body, entity of the state of Israel, is building a kindergarten and operating a kindergarten in what essentially is still an illegal outpost, an illegal settlement. And I think to a certain extent, this government has brought about a normalization of even its efforts to expand the settlement movement in an illegal manner. We've seen the government giving all-terrain vehicles to people running illegal outposts, also people who are actually under indictment in court for violence against Palestinians. Those kind of people also received all-terrain vehicles from the agriculture ministry, from the settlements ministry. So we're seeing a kind of normalization of illegal activity by the government itself, and I think this is very worrying. And I should also say that I think on the other side of the map, the left wing, the centrists, the liberals, however you want to describe them, there's no answer to this. There's very rarely even any condemnation of this, because I think it's just so politically risky to talk about, whether it's Palestinian rights or, Palestinian self-rule. One of the major objections to the settlements in Homesh and those other 3 settlements which were evacuated in 2005 is that they interrupt Palestinian territorial contiguity and make Palestinian self-rule very difficult. And Palestinian self-rule is difficult. It means it's difficult for Israel to separate from the Palestinians. But yet, this kind of issue, which used to be so important to the Israeli left and to the opposition, it's barely mentioned because it's so politically risky, since October 7th. And obviously the very clear and present danger and reality of Palestinian terrorism, it means that the whole issue of separation from the Palestinians has just been, that issue has been abandoned to a large extent because of how problematic it is to talk about. And I think, again, we're seeing that issue or that lack of response again when the government and the education ministry builds a kindergarten in Homesh.
Right. One of the things that caught my eye in the story is, of course, it's a kindergarten, meaning there are real families that are living in this Homesh settlement. And it just kind of points to the rootedness of these settlements, meaning we're not talking about just some single men that are going out to some kind of outpost and, having some kind of Wild West adventure. No, we're talking about families that are there. And for me personally, I heard about this new kindergarten in Homesh on the same day that I was told by a friend who lives in Modi'in, which is a very centrist city in central Israel, that all the kindergartens in her area have been closed for lack of pupils. So it is just fascinating to see this potential shift of population, the youth being fostered in these illegal settlements in the West Bank or Judea and Samaria. Jeremy, thank you so much for speaking with me today. Such a pleasure.
Good to be with you as always, Amanda.
Thanks for listening to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. Please check out another installment tomorrow. This episode was produced by the Podwaves. If you have any questions or comments about this or any other episode, please drop us an email to podcast@timesofisrael.com. Until tomorrow, shalom.